Welcome students to the MOOC course of Introduction to Sociology 2. Today our topic is Introduction to Functionalism and Overview. So, what is the aim of this session, today's session? Firstly, we will try to understand and explain how, as a theory, functionalism emerged. Secondly, we have this idea that, functionalism was the very first significant theory in sociology. So, what was the historical background that it became the first significant theory in sociology? And also, the focus will be on the basic principles, the major theorists, and a little bit on the points of criticism as a whole. By the end of this session, we would be learning why and when did functionalism emerge. So the context of functionalism. And then how did functionalism gradually evolve? It changed over time. But how? The basic tenets of functionalism, major proponents of functionalism, and finally the criticisms. So let us start. So what was the historical background like? The idea of functionalism was basically derived from biology, radical philosophy, and economics. Let me tell you the story how. So, after the French Revolution, there was this entire chaos, as you know, for all revolutions, entire chaos all over the society. Now, people in a state of chaos after the revolution, obviously they were very confused, and the question that was bothering them was basically, we call it the Hobbesian question: how to maintain social order, how to bring back the society to an equilibrium state. Now, everybody was trying to find a solution in their own ways. Firstly, radical philosophy tried to answer the question. However, they failed at it. After that, economics tried answering the question through an utilitarian approach. What do I mean by utilitarian approach? Now, they started saying that, whatever makes the masses, the general public happy, that is to be done. Now, that also has a problem. So, what is the problem? So if I think what is good for me, I do that. Another person thinks what is good for them, they do that. So again, it's not a situation of consensus. It's not an equilibrium state at all. So after economics failed, functionalism arose as a reaction to utilitarianism. It's very important to remember this, that functionalism arose in the context of this utilitarian failure. So what happened? It became an anti-utilitarian approach. So what was their key focus? What was the key focus of this new theory that emerged as a reaction? The key focus was harmony, order, equilibrium, and interrelationships. As per the biologists, society is a holistic complex. It's not a separate small entity. It's a whole composed of many parts, just like our body. So, why did I mention biology later? Because we will see as we go that a little bit was taken from here. Biology could not solve the problem. Functionalism did, but even then, a little bit was taken from biology. Now, as you can see, this is the French Revolution, and it's a complete chaos all over. So when we say functionalism, what is the word that comes to our ears? The main word that comes to our ears is function. We all know in our daily usage we use the term function. So what do they mean? What do the functionalists mean by saying function? They argue that society is a complex whole, just like the biologists say. and it is composed of many different parts. Just like our body is composed of many different parts, and they function in their own specific ways to make the body function properly. Similarly, society also is a combination, is the summation of these parts. So what is function? Function is the contribution of each of these parts to the social whole. What it does is it maintains the system to run smoothly, the social system to run smoothly. Just like in our body, in the biological body that we have, all the parts, the hand, the legs, the brain, the eyes, each of them have specific tasks or contributions or functions. Only if all these functions are done properly, then the entire body functions properly. Exactly in the same way, it's for the society. If all the parts of the society, like education, law, family, all these function properly, the social whole will function properly. Now, when we talk about function, you must have noticed that, usually function is said in a very positive way, as a positive contribution. However, the functionalists, the sociologists, they have identified that function is not always positive. There are also negative contributions to the society. So they are negative functions. They are there in the society as a part, but their contribution to the society is negative, and they term it as dysfunction. Let us come to the basic principles of functionalism. You've already got an idea how functionalism arose, why did it arise, and the basic term used in functionalism, function. Now, what were the major principles, basic principles of functionalism? These elements of the whole, or the components of the whole, are functionally interrelated. What do I mean by this? They are interconnected and interrelated. So, if one part stops functioning, it affects the interrelated other parts too. The components generally contribute positively, as we've already discussed, but in some cases there are also dysfunctions. Thirdly, most systems that affect the other systems should be viewed as subsystems of the larger system. So, education, family, marriage, law, economy, polity, all these can be considered as subsystems under the larger whole of the society. Now, this functional analysis, it conceptualizes a system and says that this system is the larger umbrella kind of a thing which influences and which has primacy over the subsystems which lie under it. Next, we move on to seeing that functionalists regard the society as a whole and very stable system of patterned interactions, of structured social relationships. Why are they talking about stable relationships, stable system? Because remember, why did functionalism arise? It started in order to maintain order and harmony. So they are talking of stability of patterned interactions over here. Now, the functionalists introduced the concept of homeostatic. They said that society maintains a state of equilibrium. So when they said this, some people questioned, then what about the disruptions that happen in between? How do you account for them? So then they explained that yes, society maintains an equilibrium state, but it may be temporarily disturbed by a crisis, but will come back, will be restored automatically. The concept of dynamic equilibrium also became extremely important in functional analysis. They said that it was an equilibrium, no doubt, but to account for the changes that happen through the ages, it is a dynamic kind of equilibrium, which is a balanced state of order. So, it remains in the static equilibrium state longer, but there are slight movements, slight changes, which keep on happening with the components being in the same equilibrium status. Functioning of the social systems, the working of the social systems efficiently, they depend on consensus or agreement of the members. Agreement on what? On the common goals and values related to the basic needs of the society. So unless people agree to follow the common goals and values related to the basic needs of the society, obviously there can't be equilibrium, there can't be order. Again, there will be fights in that case. So they said that consensus was important. Now, there are mainly two versions of functionalism that we talk of. What is soft functionalism? Soft functionalism was mostly propounded by functionalists like Malinowski, Radcliffe Brown, and R.K. Merton. Now, this soft functionalism says that societies can be regarded as structures. What are these structures composed of? Interrelated parts. It does not say anything beyond this. Here comes the other kind of version of functionalism, that is the hard functionalism. So this hard functionalism is based on norms. It is normative. It argues that society and actions of its members must be viewed as a total system or as a set of systems. Third concept after homeostasis and dynamic equilibrium, here again I will come to another concept used by these functionalists that is called functional equivalence. What are functional equivalents? They substitute the functions for all types of institutions. This alternative is called functional equivalence. Here we come to the key proponents of functionalist theory. First, very important, Emile Durkheim. Next comes Malinowski, Radcliffe Brown, Talcott Parsons, and R.K. Merton. We will get into the details, a little bit of the details of these theorists and thinkers in a later bit. Now, we will talk of many different things. We have talked of how it emerged, why the need came for functionalism to emerge, and the basic principles and the types. Here we come to the main concepts that are used throughout the functionalist theory. First, as we know, as the name suggests, is function. And what comes with function? Obviously, dysfunction. Next, we have also studied the other concept which is important here for the functionalist is equilibrium. Next comes status. It may be ascribed status, which we get by birth, like our race, our religion, all these. It may be achieved status, like you become a teacher, you become a doctor, and you achieve something. Next is social order. Obviously, they were ultimately trying to answer the Hobbesian question of social order, how to maintain social order. And this is the next important term, collective conscience. Unless and until there are consensus between the members of the society regarding the values and the norms of the society, society cannot be in equilibrium. So how can people come to consensus? There has to be a collective conscience, not individual, but everyone has to share that common conscience. And related to this is the value consensus. We agree on the same values. However, here, do remember that in a specific society, members should agree to the same values, but it may differ from one society to the other. Next comes specialized division of labor. People now have very, very specific work. They do not replicate work anymore. When we study Durkheim's division of labor, we will get into the minute details of this part. Next is role allocation. What do I mean by role allocation? In a society, everyone has a function to perform. So, on the basis of that, obviously you have a role in society. So, your role determines your function. Your functions in turn also influence and affect your roles. Next, sanctions are also like norms. And finally, very interestingly, there is the concept of anomie. What is anomie? Anomie is normlessness. Now, it is interesting. Why? Because here the functionalists are talking about maintaining norms, maintaining order, stability, harmony. And a very important concept also is anomie, that is normlessness. Now, functionalism is also called a structural consensus theory. There are two parts, structural and consensus. Why structural? Because there is a social structure shaping individual behaviors through the process of socialization. Why is it called structural consensus theory? As we have already discussed, a successful society is obviously based on value consensus. People should agree to a certain set of shared values. 1798 is the birth of Auguste Comte. He is known as the father of sociology. He was essentially a positivist. He believed that, science of society, which is sociology, is essentially similar to the natural sciences like biology. So he thought that the same methods could be applied to the study of sociology as well. He talked about social order too, being a functionalist. However, he also talked about social change in his major theory of social statics and dynamics. Next came Herbert Spencer in 1820. He was a British and he continued this evolutionary sociology of Comte. He first provided the idea of social functions in his Principles of Sociology, and he talked about the organic analogy. What is organic analogy? Where we compare the society and its parts with body and its parts. So Spencer was the first one. Next comes Emile Durkheim, the greatest functionalist, who was born in 1858. He was the first ever professor of sociology. He said that society shapes the individual, and he conceptualized the idea of social facts. He said they are external to the individual and they are constraining. They constrain the individual and are coercive as well. He talked about social solidarity, socialization, and anomie. He argued that just like we belong to a family, that sense of belonging needs to be there in the new institutions like schools, workplaces, and voluntary organizations. And he predicted that eventually these will be the social glue through which people would feel glued or belonging to that particular institution. And this is what he thought social solidarity idea would be coming into the people. He talked about socialization, or the teaching of shared norms and values through institutions. He thought was one of the key ways in which social solidarity is achieved. Next comes the anthropologist, who was also a functionalist, Bronislaw Malinowski. In 1944, he argued that human beings have a set of universal biological needs which are common in all societies, and various customs and institutions are developed in order to fulfill those needs. The function of any practice was the role it played in satisfying these biological needs like food, shelter, and others. Malinowski talked about functionalism in two senses. Firstly, all customs and institutions in society were integrated. If one changed, the other will obviously change. So, any ethnographer who would start working to understand the culture can begin anywhere and eventually understand the rest of the culture, because if one changes, the other changes too. The other sense was needs functionalism. So humans have universal set of biological needs and customs are developed to fulfill them, as I already discussed. Next we come to Radcliffe Brown. History is important according to him, but anthropology cannot hope to discover history of people without writing. He urged the anthropologists to focus on role particular practices play in people's lives today. He assumed that customs and cultural practices exist to preserve this social structure so that it remains intact in order. And he also says that function of any practice is the role it plays as part of that system. Next comes the most important functionalist, Talcott Parsons, with his functional fit theory. Parsons has a historical perspective on the evolution of the nuclear family. His functional fit theory is that as society changes, the type of family that fits into that society also changes. The functions that those changed societies will need also developed. So the functions of earlier times changes to the functions of present times. Over the last 200 years, society has moved from pre-industrial to industrial. So there was the agriculture-based society, which now changed and moved towards the industry-based society. Similarly, extended families started breaking down and the nuclear families arose. The nuclear family fits the more complex industrial society better, but it performs a reduced number of functions. The extended family consisted of parents, children, grandparents, and aunts and uncles living under the same roof, or in a collection of houses nearby each other in the same neighborhood. Such a large family unit fitted the pre-industrial kind of societies, as the family was completely responsible for the education of the children, for producing food, for caring for the sick. Basically, it did everything for its members in the pre-industrial societies. In contrast to pre-industrial societies, industrial societies had the isolated nuclear families, as we said, consisting of only parents and children. This kind of became the current norm. This type of family fitted the industrial society because it required a mobile workforce who could move from one place to the other. So, if it is a small family, they could just shift to another place, move to another place for work with their family. The extended family was obviously, with so many people, you cannot migrate or move so easily. Now, the growing economy is obviously changing. It required this mobility. So, gradually, the extended family gave way to the smaller nuclear family, which was easier to fit into this requirement of the economy then. However, Parsons was criticized over here. Several academicians, they criticized Parsons' this theory. They said we are dealing with human society. Entire kind of social change does not happen in such perfect, orderly, normative manner. Some studies also suggested that the family was already nuclear before industrialization. It's not that industrialization brought the change into the family structure and nuclear family came for the first time in the industrial society. It's not that. It was there earlier also. Maybe in less numbers, but it was there. Researchers found that extended kin networks were still strong in East London, where they did the research as late as the 1970s. Now, Parsons had certain basic assumptions in his theory. Writing in the 1940s and 50s, Parsons built on Durkheim's work. First, he talked about the organic analogy. I'm not repeating it because you already know by now what organic analogy is. Next, he talked about value consensus, which we have already discussed. Now, the first premise of Parsons was functional unity. He talked about this, explaining it as unity of various parts of the society. Secondly, functional universality. Functions of institutions were universally same, irrespective of time and space, argued Parsons. Thirdly, functional indispensability. A particular institution can only undertake one specific function that cannot be undertaken by other institutions. No functional alternatives to the roles given to specific institutions. So, for example, academics performs the role of education. Mothers perform the role of caring. Fathers perform the role of caring. So, Parsons assumed these. He made these assumptions. Parsons was criticized by Merton on these fronts. Merton said, unity between the parts of the system cannot be taken for granted. It is there, but you cannot take it for granted. So, this grand theory of Parsons needs revision. It may not need complete change, but it needs revision. Merton argued, unlike Parsons, that the subject of sociology should be analysis of functions which can be both latent and manifest, as well as a negative function. Merton rejected Parsons' theory of functional indispensability. He introduced dynamism in functionalism rather than determinism. For example, in today's world, think of the daycare system. Parents and family have the basic function of taking care of the little ones. However, in today's world, we also use the daycare system which functions as the same. So, Merton argues against that. And here, by talking about all these revisions, Merton chooses a midway where he puts forth his middle range theory. We are not getting into the details of each one of it because here we are just introducing them. Now, functionalism talks of order, harmony, equilibrium, status quo. Where is change? Where is conflict? What about history that changes? So, is it ahistorical? To what extent does socialization shape an individual's identity? Questions like these arise. Is anomie or too much freedom a problem today? Do institutions really perform positive functions? Do all benefit equally with the same positive function? Do we have value consensus in today's society? I've already mentioned it fails to account for social change. fails to account for individual agency, what an individual actor can do. It attributes human-like needs to society. And it is not an effective way to look at society. Everyone deviates from norms. So that is how functionalism has been criticized at several levels. Thank you, students.